Picture this. It's Thanksgiving Day, and instead of a feast, a secret US Army base in Greenland receives a chilling distress signal. Situation grave. A very sick man. Hurry! This ominous message marks the beginning of one of the most harrowing survival stories of World War II. The message is about Bill O'Hara, a flight navigator who crashed 3 weeks ago. His feet, ravaged by dry gangrene from the extreme cold, have turned into blackened, mummified lumps. As he lies helpless in an ice hole, his friends watch in horror as his flesh tears away from the bone. His feet will later fall off into his boots. Greenland is a frozen hell, with 80% of its land buried under ice and temperatures plummeting to -40 degrees. Blizzards can blind eyes and scour glass, and human skin left exposed experiences instant frostbite. It was on November 9th, 1942, during the Second World War, that a US B-17 aircraft crashed in a fog of ice in the harsh Greenland coast during a terrible winter. The plane of 9 men, comprising 6 airmen, 2 volunteers, and an extra passenger, was led by Lieutenant Armand Monteverdi. Among them was Bill O'Hara, who had been a navigator in the American military for several seasons when the plane crash occurred. As one of the more experienced members of the crew, he prided himself on his navigational skills and ability to survive in extreme cold. They were among one of the rescue planes on a search mission to rescue a C-53 Skytrooper that had crashed some days earlier. On that fateful day, the weather conditions were really bad. Monteverdi could barely see past the windshield, the endless expanse of white snow blending with the sky. Pilots had a name for this kind of flying: milk runs. The world outside the cockpit became an indistinct blur of white. As they navigated through this thick Arctic fog at a harrowing speed of 180 miles per hour, disaster struck. The altimeter began to drop, and Monteverdi realized with a sinking feeling that they were dangerously low. Before he could react, the plane struck the ice sheet with a deafening sound. The bomber swung out of control, skidding across the frozen tundra for nearly half a mile before coming to a stop. Stunned, but alive, the crew emerged from the wreckage, quickly assessing their dire situation. Surrounded by an unending sea of ice and snow, they faced the chilling reality. They were alone, with no way to communicate, no rescue in sight. Their only hope lay in what they could scrape together from the remains of their shattered aircraft. As darkness enveloped them, they huddled together against the biting cold, haunted by a single gnawing question: would anyone ever find them? Communication was impossible. The crash had destroyed their radio before they had a chance to send a distress signal. The chances of finding them in the midst of the endless white snow were near impossible. The men became determined to stay alive for as long as possible, without knowing if anyone would even attempt to find them. Meanwhile, the temperatures continued to plummet, bringing the dire threat of frostbite and hypothermia. The men built a small shelter using the damaged airplane's metal body and any leftover cloth they could find. They used the last of the fuel to start a fire, desperate to keep warm in the freezing cold. Food was terribly scarce. All they could find were a few canned rations and some chocolate bars left in the wreckage. The men rationed every bite, knowing their survival depended on making the limited supplies last. With no way to call for help, the men pinned their only hope on catching the attention of passing aircraft. They lit flares and built towering signal fires, their hearts pounding as they scanned the skies. But the dense fog and blinding snow made them nearly invisible from above. Lieutenant Monteverdi knew that rescue was their only chance of survival. He tasked his navigator, Lieutenant John Phelan, with charting their position as precisely as possible. Using the plane's damaged instruments and celestial navigation, Phelan determined that they had crashed approximately 230 miles from the nearest outpost. It was a daunting distance, especially with their limited supplies and the unforgiving Greenland weather. As the days turned into weeks, morale began to wane. The men's spirits sank, as they realized that no one seemed to be coming for them. They struggled to maintain hope as frostbite claimed their fingers and toes, but they refused to give up, determined to do whatever it took to make it out alive. The concern about the cold and rapidly dwindling food supply was serious, and it gradually began to be overshadowed by the question of where the rescue planes would stay for so long. The crew was unable to radio their location because the B-17's communications equipment was broken. The boxes where the radio equipment was placed served as windbreaks for those in need. The dangers were constant. A few days later, co-pilot Harry Spencer fell through a hidden crevice in the ice. Miraculously, his fall was stopped by a random block of ice wedged just in the right spot to prevent him from plummeting to death. The team worked together to pull him out. One of them, Bill O'Hara's expertise, was to be pushed to the limit. With no concern for his own safety, he worked tirelessly for hours, rigging a pulley system to pull Spencer from the depths. As the wind whipped and temperatures plummeted further, O'Hara's feet slowly lost feeling inside his snow boots. The materials were meant for casual expeditions, not prolonged rescue efforts in harsh blizzard conditions. By the time they succeeded in rescuing Spencer, O'Hara could barely stand. His feet had gone completely numb and turned black with severe frostbite. But with the camp still miles away and nightfall approaching, getting help wasn't an option. Somehow, O'Hara found the strength to continue guiding the others back as his feet swollen and blistering inside his ruined boots. It was a grueling trek that nearly cost him his life. He got very ill and was taken care of by the other survivors. At the same time, it became increasingly clear to everyone that they could no longer rely on the accidental discovery of the wreck. When the weather cleared, Liaison Officer Lolly Howarth took a closer look at the radio equipment and discovered that several of the glass radio tubes were intact. He decided to try to fix the radio. But as a radio operator, he mainly knew how to use radio equipment, not how to build a radio. At that time, of course, every one of them knew a little about radio business, and Howarth started messaging with the radio outside because any random spark in the wreckage could have caused the remains of jet fuel to explode. It boosted the team's spirit a lot. Howarth rushed to broadcast the first message. The receiver on the radio was not working, so he had no idea if anyone could hear his message. PN9E, aircraft call sign ED. Down on the glacier. In life. Send help quickly. Though rescue planes were unable to reach them due to worsening weather, the crew's message had been received. They knew help was coming. A week later, on November the 24th, a supply drop broke through, bringing much-needed rations. The crew wept with relief and gratitude. Unfortunately, a blizzard had broken out again, preventing any planes from taking off for the next 8 days. The weather forecast for November the 24th was also scary, but one Norwegian pilot, Bernt Balchen, decided to take the risk anyway. Balchen took off in a big plane called a Douglas C-54 Skymaster and flew across Greenland to try to help people in trouble. He had packed his plane with food, blankets, warm clothes, medicine, and 2 small plants so people could warm themselves. A big storm was raging outside, with winds blowing at 280 kilometers per hour. My plane was tossed around in the air for 20 minutes like a leaf in the wind. This was the strongest storm I have ever flown in, and it could have killed me, Balchen later wrote. When Balchen reached the area north of Kyrgyz Bay, he saw the broken pieces of a B-17 plane. He tried to drop some supplies with parachutes, but the storm blew them far away. So he decided to just throw the boxes directly at the wreck. Balchen reported finding the wreck, but said rescuing the men would be very risky. He could see deep cracks in the ice all around the wreck. It seemed the only way to get to it was from the north, but even that would be very dangerous. Before heading back, Balchen sent a message saying that a ship called the Northland had reached the bay south of the wreck, and that a snowmobile and sled dog team were also nearby. The Northland had a small seaplane called the Grumman J2F. Pilot John Pritchett and radio operator Benjamin Bottom decided to take a risk and try to land on the ice to rescue the men. Lieutenant John Pritchard planned to fly his seaplane from the USS Northland and land on the glacier near the B-17 wreck. As his plans were approaching, he dropped a note to the B-17 crew asking if he should land wheels up or wheels down. He ended the note with, "If there's a 60-40 chance, I'll take it." The trapped soldiers were happy to read those words, but they knew the risks that might come with it. So, they gathered at the tail of the plane. They waved Pritchard off, worried that a landing could be dangerous. But to their amazement, Pritchard landed safely, wheels down at about 3 kilometers from the wreckage, and carefully made their way towards it. They were able to evacuate 2 of the men, but the others were too weak to walk to the seaplane. That evening, 2 snowmobiles arrived at the wreck, but one of them fell into a deep crack in the ice. Pritchard and Bottom tried to land again to help, but their seaplane also crashed, killing all 3 men on board. The weather became more terrible, frustrating every other rescue attempt to save the men. It took 89 days before the weather allowed the remaining men to be rescued. Carefully, the rescue team landed their plane next to the survivors, braving the uneven ice and howling winds. The men were in bad shape, suffering from severe frostbite, dehydration, and malnutrition. But with great care and determination, the rescue team managed to pull them aboard the plane and take off, heading back to the safety of WWII. 𝐃𝐨𝐧'𝐭 landed a different plane and was able to carry the very thin O'Hara into his plane. The captain and 2 other crew members had to wait another 2.5 weeks before they could finally escape the ice, after spending 148 days trapped there. The ordeal, however, was far from over. The return trip was fraught with danger as the rescue plane battled through blinding snowstorms and perilous icy conditions. At one point, the aircraft was forced to land on a treacherous ice floe, the crew working tirelessly to clear the runway and get the plane airborne again. It was after 10 grueling hours the rescue plane finally touched down at WWII, the battered but relieved survivors emerging to a hero's welcome. The local doctors and nurses immediately sprang into action, providing urgent medical care and working to stabilize the men's condition. Over the next several weeks, the rescued crew underwent extensive treatment and rehabilitation. Some had lost fingers, and others, like O'Hara, lost their toes and almost foot to frostbite, while others suffered from severe dehydration and malnutrition. But against all the odds, they had survived the ordeal, standing as one of the daring and heroic operations of World War II.